If you look at the screen, you will see the South China Sea. Why is the South China Sea important? For me, the South China Sea today is the most important international waterway in the world. 5.8 trillion US dollars in shipborne goods traverse the South China Sea every year. It's about half of the total gross tonnage of shipborne goods every year. And the South China Sea is used by 4 leading exporting countries for their maritime trade. You have China, South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan. 65% of the petroleum imports of South Korea pass through the narrow Strait of Malacca, going all the way to South Korea. 60% of the petroleum imports of Japan, 60% of the petroleum imports of Taiwan pass through the narrow Strait of Malacca on their way to these countries. And for China, 50% of the petroleum imports of China pass through the Strait of Malacca, traversing to China. Before 2015, 80% of the petroleum imports of China passed through the narrow Strait of Malacca, and the Chinese were worried that if someone will block the narrow Strait of Malacca, China's economy will grind to a halt. So China built 2 pipelines, oil and gas pipelines from the coast of Myanmar to Kunming in Yunnan province. They started operating in 2015. So 30% of China's petroleum imports pass through these 2 pipelines, only 50% today. The South China Sea is a small sea. It occupies only 2.5% of the world's ocean surface, but it's very productive in terms of fish because of the spratlys. The spratlys are the spawning ground of fish. Without the spratlys, you won't get fish, that much fish in the South China Sea. The South China Sea accounts for 12% of the annual global fish catch in the world. That's about $21.8 billion a year. And China is the #1 beneficiary of this. In the 1990s, China was only taking 20% of the annual fish catch in the South China Sea. Today, it's taking 50%, and it's growing because China has 1.4 billion people. Their people are getting richer. They want fish on their table. And 2 billion people live in countries surrounding the South China Sea. About 300 million people depend on fish from the South China Sea for their protein. Also, the South China Sea, along the coast of the countries here, you will find rich oil and gas fields. Philippines, we have Malampaya here. Brunei is here. Sabah, Malaysia's oil and gas fields also. You have Natuna Islands. This is the exclusive economic zone of Indonesia. Natuna Islands, you'll find there the richest gas field in Southeast Asia, the second largest gas field in the world. Oil and gas fields are on the coast of Vietnam and China. The Chinese estimate that the South China Sea hold about 130 billion barrels of oil, and that is correct, then the South China Sea is as rich as Kuwait or the United Arab Emirates in terms of oil deposits. The Chinese also estimate that the methane hydrates in the South China Sea could power the Chinese economy for 100 years. The methane hydrates are the fuel of the future. They're lumps of crystallized natural gas at the very deep areas of the sea where the temperature is cold and the pressure is strong. Ice crystals form around natural gas. And there's now a technology to extract this. The US has developed the technology, Canada, Japan, and China. And China is pilot testing methane hydrates gas fields off the coast of Guangdong now. The South China Sea is also dotted with hundreds of small rocks above water at high tide. Tiny rocks, maybe a few inches above water at high tide, maybe 1 meter. But even if it's just a few inches above water at high tide, the rock is considered land or territory. And it is capable of sovereign ownership. And there is a territorial sea to that rock and a territorial airspace above it. What is the area of this territorial sea of 12 nautical miles? That area is about 155,000 hectares. That's more than twice the land area of Metro Manila. Metro Manila has a land area of 63,000 hectares, more than twice the land area of Singapore. Singapore has 70,000 hectares. So if you own a tiny rock in the middle of the South China Sea, you own a very huge territorial sea. You own all the fish, oil, and gas and mineral resources within that area. You can reclaim it to the edge of the territorial sea. So you have a huge island. So tiny rocks above water at high tide are very valuable. That's why states fight over these tiny rocks. Now, China did not participate in the proceedings of The Hague, but China said, we are not participating, but we have this position paper. This is our position paper. So China's historical narrative to claim the South China Sea is this. China said, Chinese activities in the South China Sea started 2,000 years ago. China was the first state to discover, name, explore, and exploit the resources in the South China Sea and exercise sovereignty over the South China Sea. This is the narrative that China uses to claim the South China Sea, and people in the West started to believe this because China is an old civilization. They said probably China really owns the South China Sea, and I've read articles in law journals saying this. We had to change this because this is totally false. This is, I call this the false history of the century, the fake news of the century, the disinformation of the century. This is totally false. I call this a gigantic fraud on the human race. China using a historical falsehood to claim an entire sea at the expense of several coastal states. How do we debunk this? How do we expose this as a lie? Well, the arbitration gave us an opportunity because China asserted it in the arbitration. We had a chance to rebut it. And we had the opportunity to ask the tribunal to rule on this historical claim. Is it true or false? Because in China today, all the generals, admirals, bureaucrats, professors, diplomats, businessmen, they all grew up being taught from grade 1 to college that they own the South China Sea since 2,000 years ago. It is in their DNA. They really believe it, honestly, sincerely, but it's totally false. That's why today, the Chinese government will not comply with the ruling of the tribunal, because if the Chinese government will comply with the ruling today, that delegitimizes them in the eyes of the Chinese people. Why are you going to give up our territory, our sovereign territory? And their mantra is this: we will not give up an inch of the sacred territory that our ancestors bequeathed to us through the generations, through ancient times. And that is our big problem. How do we change the mindset of the Chinese people that that is totally wrong? China submitted this map to the United Nations in 2009. Officially now, it was only in 2009 that China officially informed the world about the 9-dash line. China claimed everything within the 9-dash line. And in 2013, China produced a new map. China added a 10th dash on the eastern side of Taiwan, so the 9-dash lines are still growing. And you have here a legend which says, this means national boundary. This is the shading of the 10 dashes here. The same shading that you find on continental land boundary of China. So China treats the waters within the 9-dash lines, I still call it 9-dash lines. China treats the waters here in the same way it treats its land territory. It's national territory. What is enclosed by your national boundaries are your national territory. So let us go back to a little bit of history. What happened in the South China Sea since 1946 up to last year? Throughout the Chinese dynasties, the southernmost territory of China was Hainan. Before World War II, still Hainan was the southernmost territory of China. Not a single Chinese sailor or soldier was stationed in the South China Sea. None in the Paracels, none in the Spratlys, none in Scarborough Shoal. Before World War II, the French occupied the Paracels. No country occupied the Spratlys. At the outbreak of World War II, the Japanese seized the paracels from the French, and the Japanese established a submarine base in Ituaba. Ituaba is the largest island in the Spratlys. That submarine base was used in the invasion of the Philippines. With the defeat of the Japanese forces in 1946, of course, the Japanese forces left. In 1946, China made its move. For the first time in its history, China moved out of Hainan, occupied half of the paracels, and occupied Ituaba, 1946. China made a great leap across the South China Sea to establish a base in Ituaba. The French, of course, recovered half of the paracels inherited by the South Vietnamese government. In 1974, the Chinese seized the other half of the paracels from the weakened South Vietnamese government towards the dying days of the Vietnam War. In 1987, China established a radar weather station on Fiery Cross Reef. Fiery Cross Reef is just 1 meter above water at high tide, a small rock. China said, we will put up a radar weather station to help UNESCO in its global oceanic survey. A very noble act. Nobody objected. Today, that radar weather station is a huge air and naval base of China. So when China says, oh, we are putting a radar weather station for the benefit of everyone in the Southeast Asia, we should be careful. We should be worried about that. In 1988, China seized Subi Reef from the Philippines and Johnson South Reef from the Communist Vietnamese. There was a skirmish here with the Communist Vietnamese. About 69 Vietnamese sailors were killed. Subi Reef is outside our EEZ, but within the territorial sea of Pag-asa. But we were not too familiar with UNCLOS at that time. It was not reported in the papers that China seized Subi Reef from us. 1995, China seized Mischief Reef from the Philippines, widely reported in the papers. 2012, China seized Scarborough Shoals from the Philippines, widely reported. 2013, China seized Lucuña Shoals from Malaysia. 2014-15, China started building air and naval bases in the Spratlys, huge ones. Huge islands like Mischief Reef is from a totally submerged area. China's island as almost as large as San Juan City. 2017, the last act of China seized Sandy Cay from the Philippines, but our government is still in denial. But in my book, China has seized that already because they have surrounded it with their maritime militia vessels, and we cannot send our vessels there anymore. They are being turned back. So China's effective control of Sandy Cay within the territorial sea of Pag-asa, the largest island that we occupy. So you will see a gradual creeping expansion by China outside of Hainan towards the 9-dash line. And the air and naval bases here will be used to enforce the national boundary of China within the 9-dash line. Those air and naval bases will be used by China to enforce the 9-dash lines as China's national boundary. In 2016, Foreign Minister Wang Yi of China gave a talk at Washington, D.C. at CSIS. And he said, the Philippines and China are very close neighbors, separated by just a narrow body of water. Think of that. We are very close neighbors with China, separated by just a narrow body of water. This is the narrow body of water that China refers to as the body of water that separates the Philippines and China, because China says this is the 9-dash line here, this is their territory also, all of that. And so we are very close neighbors with the Philippines. That is in their DNA. They've been taught that from grade school to college. I call this the gravest external threat to the Philippines since World War II, because we will lose an area larger than the combined area, total land area of the Philippines. That this area, maritime space, is larger than the combined land area of the Philippines if you put all our islands together. So we are going to lose a huge maritime space. We lose all the fish, oil, gas, and mineral resources here because under UNCLOS, under the ruling of the tribunal, we have exclusive sovereign rights to all the natural resources in this area. But China is claiming all of that under the 9-9. Recently, President Xi Jinping visited us here, and the Chinese ambassador, Ambassador Zhao, wrote an article in Philippine Star on November 15, just a few days before the arrival of President Xi Jinping. And in his article, he said, being separated by only a narrow strip of water, China and the Philippines have been close neighbors for centuries. He is repeating this historical narrative of China, and this is the context of the visit of President Xi Jinping. That President Xi Jinping is coming here because China and the Philippines are very close neighbors. Of course, he was referring to this very narrow strip of water. And I think we should not let this pass unchallenged. We should challenge this. We should write letters to the editor, comment online on this. We cannot let them do this to us, telling us to our face that what separates China and the Philippines is a very narrow body of water. Because if that is true, we lose a huge area, we lose what we won in the tribunal, and we will have a very long sea boundary with China from Balabac Island to Yami Island here, the northernmost island of the Philippines in Batanes, Yami Island. That's 1,700 kilometers of common sea boundary with China. And we must prepare for the day. One day, the Politburo of China will instruct the powerful Navy of China enforce the 9-line as a national boundary of China. We have to be prepared for that day. And we should have prepared years ago for this. Now, we had a chance to debunk this historical narrative of China by submitting to the tribunal over 170 ancient maps. Ancient maps of China, ancient maps of the Philippines, ancient maps of Southeast Asia, including official documents of China after the Qing dynasty. We submitted this to the tribunal for one purpose, to show that China never owned or controlled the South China Sea at any time in its history. That was the sole purpose of all these documents that we submitted. Let's go to the ancient maps of the Philippines. You are, of course, familiar with this mother of all Philippine maps, the 1734 map of Father Pedro Murillo Velarde. For the first time in any map, Scarborough was given a name, a Tagalog word, Panakot. So we were the first to give a name to Scarborough Shoal. We gave it a Tagalog word, Panakot, because Panakot means danger. If you are the captain of a ship and you don't know where Panakot is, your ship will hit the rocks of Panakot, and that's what happened to a British Tea-Keeper ship called Scarborough. It ran aground on Scarborough Shoal. European cartographers renamed the shoal Scarborough Shoal. And in this map, you will see here shoals, Los Bajos de Paragua. Paragua is the old name of Palawan. It was changed into Palawan only in the 1903. Los Bajos is the Spanish term for shoals, the shoals of Palawan. What are the shoals of Palawan? They are the Spratlys. So in this map, you have Scarborough Shoal as a territory of the Philippines, you have the Spratlys as a territory of the Philippines, and this is an official map of the Philippine territory in 1734, because you will see here the royal coat of arms of Spain. And this map was made upon instructions of King Philip V of Spain to Governor General Fernando Talmon, the Governor General at that time. And Governor General Talmon commissioned Father Pedro Murillo Velarde, a Jesuit priest, a Spanish Jesuit priest, here in Manila. So this map was printed in Manila, The engraver of this map was a Filipino, Nicolas de la Cruz Bagay, and the artist who drew this map is a Filipino, Francisco Suarez. A very famous map, engraved in copper plates, printed in Manila, showing Philippine territory, official Philippine territory in 1734, including already Scarborough Shoal and the Spratlys as part of Philippine territory. There is no older map from China or from Vietnam showing that Scarborough Shoal or the Spratlys form part of their territory. We have the oldest map. So here you will see the cartouche, the royal coat of arms of Spain. It's an official map of the Philippines in 1734. How did Father Pedro Emilio Velarde come across this? How did he include the shoals of Palawan, the Spratlys, as part of Philippine territory? He took it from an earlier map. The 1688 Coronelli globe is these are the portions of the globe. And in this map, it shows here, is all Philippines. Father Coronelli was a Franciscan monk. The Franciscans arrived in the Philippines in 1578, and all these religious orders that came here would send periodic reports to the Vatican. What were the names of the new towns? What were the names of the new islands occupied? And Father Coronelli was sitting there in the Vatican getting all of these reports, and he drew a map of the Philippines. And he drew lines around the Philippines, lines around the Portuguese position in the East Indies, the Dutch possession, and he included the Spratlys as part of the Philippines. And that's where Father Murillo put Bajolos Baos de Paragua as part of the Philippines in 1734. So this is even an older map showing the Spratlys belong to the Philippines. This is a map of 1808, but the data for this map, this was published in Madrid during the Spanish regime. The data from this map was taken from the Malaspina expedition. Alessandro Malaspina headed the Spanish expedition to go around the world, visit the Spanish possessions all over the world, to collect specimens of flora and fauna, and to chart the waters of the possession of the Spanish territories all over the world. It was a scientific expedition. The Spaniards followed the British. The British sent Captain Cook on a scientific expedition around the world earlier, and the Spanish followed suit. And at that time, it was like sending a man to the moon. It was a voyage of exploration. And Alessandro Malaspina was here in Manila in 1792, and he surveyed Scarborough Shoal. He made a survey, nautical survey of Scarborough Shoal, because it was a famous shoal. And this survey was incorporated in this map that was published by the Spanish government. And Alessandro Malaspina had a journal, and in his journal, the entry in his journal on May 4, 1792 says, "On this shoal, Spanish and foreign ships have been lost." We have the first nautical survey of Scarborough Shoal. There's no such survey by China. Let's go to the ancient maps of China, published in China. We use Chinese documents here. This is Tang Dynasty map of China, sometime 1098 to 1100 AD. And this map is found in the Atlas of Ancient Maps in China, officially published by the People's Republic of China, by its State Bureau of Cultural Relics of China. So this is an official publication of the People's Republic of China, showing the ancient maps of China. And this is map 97. And it shows Hainan as the southernmost territory of China during the Tang Dynasty. This is the book that the State Bureau of Cultural Relics of China published. And that map is found in this book. I was able to get a copy of this book. It's an official publication of China. There are 3 volumes. Another map from the Atlas of Ancient Maps of China. This is map 95. This is still the Tang. This is 1098-1100 Tang Dynasty. It shows again Hainan as the southernmost territory of China. And this map is the oldest map that we presented to the tribunal. The earlier 2 maps, I came across that after the tribunal issued its ruling. So this is the oldest map that we presented to the tribunal, 1136. It says China and the barbarian countries, and it shows Hainan as the southernmost territory of China. This was published during the Southern Song Dynasty in 1903. This map is a stone map. There's only 1 copy of this map. It's engraved in stone, and this map is still in exhibit. You can still see this map in the Museum of Stone Steels in Xi'an, China. In 1903 or thereabouts, a Frenchman made a rubbing of this map. Placed paper, rubbed it, and this is the impression. And this impression is found in the US Library of Congress, where I downloaded it for free. But these annotations here are not in the original stone map. It was just added by the Frenchman. But this map is also found in the Atlas of Ancient Maps of China, map number 60, officially acknowledged by China as a Song Dynasty map, showing that their southernmost territory was Hainan. Another map, so you have the Song Dynasty. The next dynasty is the Yuan Dynasty. This is the Yuan Dynasty map, 1343. This is found also in the Atlas of Asian Maps in China. This is map 193, and it shows Hainan as the southernmost territory of China. China's own documents, official dynasty documents, showing the Chinese territory during the Yuan Dynasty ended in Hainan. This is a Ming Dynasty map. There's only 1 copy because this map is painted on silk, and it shows Hainan as the southernmost territory of China. This is found again in the Atlas of Ancient Maps of China, and this is map number 1 because it's a very famous map of China, Ming Dynasty. They put it as map number 1, and they cannot escape this. Hainan is the southernmost territory by their own official documents. This map is not an official map of China, but I'm including this because this is a famous map. We submitted this also to the tribunal. This is the famous Selden map of China. It's called Selden because this is named after the British lawyer John Selden, who acquired this map from a British captain who sailed in the South China Sea. And John Selden, the most famous, the greatest lawyer of United Kingdom at that time, donated this map to the Bodleian University of Oxford. And it was lost for 100 years, lost in the basement of Oxford. Nobody read it, nobody saw it. And finally, in 2009, it was rediscovered and became a hit. It became a sensation. But what does this map tell us? This map shows the trade routes. This is a unique map because in all the Chinese dynasty maps, China is always at the center of the map because China is the center of the universe. It's the Middle Kingdom. They always put China in the center of the map. But this map is unique because the center of the map is the South China Sea. China is just in the upper portion. And in this map, it shows Hainan as the southernmost territory of China, and it shows the trade routes from Manila, from the Philippines, from Vietnam, from Japan to India to Indonesia. It shows the trade routes and all countries that use the South China Sea as an international waterway. This map shows that during the Ming Dynasty, the South China Sea was used by all nations as their international waterway to trade. China never owned it. And that is the value of this map. So the trade routes show that really China, the South China Sea was an international waterway. This is the last dynasty map of China that we presented. This is the last map that I could find during the Qing dynasty. The Qing dynasty ended in 1912. That's the last dynasty of China. And it shows Hainan in inset as the southernmost territory of China. Now we superimposed all the dynasty maps of China on the map of Asia. We showed this to the tribunal that during the entire Chinese dynasties, Chinese territory ended in Hainan. By their own official documents, Chinese territory never reached the Paracels, never reached the Spratlys, never reached Scarborough Shoal. That's why we submitted to the tribunal that dating back all these maps of China dating back to 1136 consistently show China's territory extending no further south than Hainan. Now, China suffered what they call the century of humiliation. You have the First Opium War, the Second Opium War. In the Second Opium War, the British destroyed the old summer capital of China. The summer capital of China was an architectural wonder, but it was destroyed by the British. And an 8-nation alliance in 1900 occupied Beijing, looted Beijing, defeated the imperial armies because there was a Boxer rebellion in 1900, and the diplomatic enclave in Beijing was in danger of being overrun by the Boxers. So the European powers, including Russia and Japan, sent an expeditionary force, occupied Beijing. You see that in the movie 55 Days in Beijing, in Peking. So it was the lowest point in Chinese history. They had to give concessions to the Western powers, concessions in Shanghai. These concessions are territories in Shanghai where the laws of the European power would govern. It was like territory of the European powers. And so the Chinese started making maps that one day when China becomes strong again, China will recover all its lost territories. And all of them drew maps. And this is the 1927 map of national humiliation. And it shows, in 1927, they said, we will recover all our lost territories. But the Chinese never included the Spratlys or Scarborough Shoal as part of their lost territories. They never dreamed that this was a territory of China, 1927 already. You see, they really went wild in claiming territories. Even if these territories were never Chinese territories, they claimed it. They claimed this, all of this, they said they will recover one day. This is the map of 1938, map of national humiliation. And it shows here, let me go back. This map, there's something unique about this map because while it did not include the Spratlys and Scarborough Shoal, it included Sulu. The Sulu archipelago was included in this 1927 map of national humiliation. Why did the Chinese people ever think that Sulu was part of their territory? Because in 1417, the Sultan of Sulu, Paduraka Nahala, went to China, bringing his wife and children and with a large entourage, went to China, and of course when you meet the Chinese emperor, you will give a gift. And because he gave a gift, the Chinese people said he is a vassal of the emperor, and his territory now is a protectorate or part of Chinese territory. So we better be careful. When Art Valdez sailed this balangay to China, he crossed the South China Sea, and I told him, if you are giving a gift to the Chinese, tell them it's just a gift, it's not a tribute, because if you don't say anything, they will consider that a tribute and they will include your province, Iloilo, as part of the 9-dash line. So we better be careful. In 1938, they came out again with a map of national humiliation, but mercifully, they did not include Sulu anymore. They still did not include the Spratlys and Scarborough Shoal. This is already 1938. And this map was taught in elementary schools in China. This is what they taught. When did China move out of Hainan? In 1932. The French occupied the Paracels. Nobody occupied the Paracels at the time. And China, for the first time, made known its claim to the Paracels. China sent a note verbal to the French in 1932. A note verbal is an official declaration to the other country and to the world. This is the note verbal. And in that note verbal, China said, there are two groups in the Paracels, the Amphitrite group and the Crescent group. They lie 145 nautical miles from Hainan, and they form the southernmost part of Chinese territory. 1932, China announcing to the world officially, our southernmost territory are the Paracels. So we show this to the tribunal, superimpose the Paracels. 1932, Chinese territory never reached the Spratlys, never reached Scarborough Shoal. When the Qing dynasty ended in 1912, the Chinese put up a republic, the Republic of China. And there were many constitutions. This is the first constitution, the provisional constitution of the Republic of China. Of course, your constitution must state your territory, and the 1914 provisional constitution of China says the territory of the Republic of China continues to be the territory of the former empire. In a book that China published, the People's Republic of China published, I found this annotation. A former empire refers to the Qing dynasty. This is in China's #2 History Archives, China International Press. Because the Qing dynasty was the largest expansion of Chinese territory, and it included Tibet. So the Chinese are saying, yes, our territory is the territory of the Qing dynasty. This is now the Republic of China, the Republicans. But that same territory of the Qing dynasty ended in Hainan. Although it included Tibet, it ended in Hainan. So, in 1924, another constitution of China, the same. The territory of the Republic of China continues to be the traditional territory. 1937 Constitution of China, the territory of the Republic of China continues to be the territory owned in the past, referring again to the dynasty territory. And the largest expansion is the Qing dynasty. January 1, we are already in 1947, they still claim the territory of the Republic of China shall be that encompassed by the traditional boundaries. All of these constitutional provisions are found in this book, published by Chinese government, the People's Republic of China, because the People's Republic of China was trying to justify that Tibet was part of its territory. So it referred to the Qing dynasty territory. That Qing dynasty territory ended in Hainan, as far as the South China Sea is concerned. In 1943, of course, there was a civil war in China. The Kuomintang was still in power. China published a handbook. This is published by the Ministry of Information, although this was printed in Calcutta, India, because the civil war was going on and they probably didn't have good printing press. So the handbook was printed in India, but it was an official handbook of the Republic of China under the Kuomintang government. And of course, if you present a handbook of China, it's like an atlas or an encyclopedia, you define your territory. So chapter 1 defines the territory of China. The territory of China ended in Triton Island in the Paracels. So Chinese territory never reached the Spratlys or Scarborough Shoal. This is an official publication of the Republic of China, the Kuomintang government, in 1943 already. The handbook was revised in that's the handbook. It's the Chinese Ministry of Information, so it's official, 43. This handbook was revised in 1946, and in the revised handbook, China now, for the first time, claimed the Spratlys. But in claiming the Spratlys, China recognized that the Coral Islands of the Spratlys are also claimed by the Commonwealth of the Philippines and Indochina, the French in Indochina. So they did not claim indisputable sovereignty. They recognized that there were other claimants. 1946. 1946 is really the year that they started claiming the Spratlys. They never claimed it before that. So this story that they owned the Spratlys since 2,000 years ago is pure hogwash. That's the 1946 edition of the China Handbook. This was published in the US, but by the Chinese Ministry of Information because, of course, there was a civil war in China. Now, in 1947, the year that China started to claim the Spratlys, China published this map internally. This is the notorious 9-line map. And in this map, China gave names to all the islands in the Spratlys, to all the islands that they claimed in the Paracels, but they never gave a name to Scarborough Shoal. And all the names that they used here in the Spratlys were just transliterations into Chinese of the English names in British Admiralty charts. So the names here are funny because they just transliterated into Chinese British names. But they never gave a name to Scarborough Shoal. And it says here, map of the South Sea Islands of China. And they gave a name to all the islands, and Scarborough Shoal was without a name. They never claimed Scarborough Shoal. Now, this is a sovereignty marker. And China has many of these in the Paracels and the Spratlys to show that they owned the Spratlys and the Paracels. They've been showing these sovereignty maps that these maps have been there in the 1900s, early 1900s. This map, these stone markers are totally fabricated. And I can prove it. This is a book explaining the naming of all the islands in the Spratlys. Very harmless. But surprisingly, there is an annex to this book. This is published by the Guangdong province government. Guangdong, before 1988, administered Hainan. Hainan was part of Guangdong before 1988. And Hainan, of course, included the Paracels and the Spratlys. So by administration, it was the Guangdong province that administered for China, Hainan, the Paracels, and the Spratlys. And there is a surprising annex to this book and a surprising editor's note. The background behind this annex is this. In 1937, the chief of the military region, number 9 of China, Wang Qiang, was sent by the Kuomintang government ostensibly to check reports that the Japanese were invading the islands and to assert Chinese sovereignty over them. That was the ostensible purpose of the mission of Wang Qiang. But actually, Wang Qiang went there to the Paracels for a different purpose. And his purpose there was to plant sovereignty markers. And he made a report, a confidential report of July 31, 1937, saying that I went there, this was 1937 report, and he placed sovereignty markers dated from 1902 to 1921. In his report, he said, at one end of the road at the North Island, a tablet can be found with the inscription commemorating the inspection of 1902. But he was doing this in 1937. Another area commemorating the inspection of 1992, he put a tablet there. This is the stone marker. but he was there in 1937. On Rocky Island, the same thing. There was a inspection of 1911, but he went there in 1930. He fabricated stone markers and put it there in 1937. And he made a report. It's a confidential report. It should not have been published. But unfortunately for them, the clerk who probably put together the names of them included it, and it was published in the book. The confidential report of how they antedated these sovereignty markers. And Francois Javier Bonnet, a Frenchman who's married to a Filipino, who lives here and has written extensively on the South China Sea dispute, he alerted me because he saw this book in a library in Hong Kong, and he Xerox portions of it and he showed it to me. So I said, I have to get a copy of this book, and I asked a friend who frequented Beijing, Manila to Beijing is a trader. I said, look for this book in second-hand bookstores in Beijing, and he combed through all the bookstores and he found a copy. And I have that copy. And I think after that, the Chinese have withdrawn all copies now. You cannot find it. It's a rare book. So by their own admission, they fabricated their sovereignty stone markers. And there's an editor's note on page 291 of the book. And the editor's note is this: stone tablets on two islands in the Spratlys might have been erected by the Taiwanese Navy in 1956, not in 1946 as indicated in the stone tablets. Why? Because the captain of the ship that went to Ituaba in 1946, remember I said China occupied Ituaba in 1946. It was occupied by a mission headed by a captain of a ship, Taiping, the name of the ship is Taiping. And he went to the editors. He said, we never reached York Island. We never reached the Spratly. Those stone markers there, we did not put those stone markers. They were probably erected by somebody else. Because the stone marker says erected in December 1946, erected in the captain of the ship said, we never reached West York Island, we never reached Spratly. So the editors concluded the stone markers might have been erected by the Taiwanese Navy in 1956. So another falsification of the markers by, of course, the Taiwanese is under the Kuomintang. The Kuomintang invented the 9-dash line, and they had to support it with supposedly sovereignty markers, but they fabricated all of this. During the arbitration, I visited China's Manila Embassy website, and I found this startling claim that China owns Scarborough Shoal because in 1279, Gu Sujing went there to put up an observatory. Guangyan Island was first discovered and came into China's map during the Yuan dynasty, 1279. Gu Sujing went there upon the instruction of Kublai Khan. And Guangyan Island was chosen as the point of observation in the South China Sea. Gu Sujing is a very famous Chinese astronomer, mathematician, engineer. He's a multi-talented, probably the most talented Chinese of his time. He developed a very accurate calendar for China. He built 27 observatories, 26 on mainland China and one in Nanhai. Nanhai means South Sea. Where in Nanhai did he put this? The website of China claims it's Scarborough Shoal. Now, Gu Sujing created a calendar more accurate than the European calendar because he had these 27 observatories, 26 on mainland China, one in the South Sea. And in these observatories, you take measurements of the sunrise, sunset, all year round, so you will know when winter will come, when summer will come, when is the time to plant, when is the time to harvest. That was the purpose of this calendar. Now, That's the website. But they have taken this down already after I exposed it. In 1980, the Chinese and the Vietnamese were quarreling over the paracels. China said, we have an older title to the paracels. The Vietnamese said, we had an older title. And China said, no, we have the oldest, because in 1279, Gu Sujing went to the paracels to put up an observatory. This is an official publication of China. China's sovereignty over the Xia. Xia are the paracels, Zhongsha are the Macclesfield Bank, including the Spratlys. So in the Beijing Review, an official publication of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they said, the astronomical observation point 999 was today's Xia Islands. It shows that Xia Islands were within the bounds of China at the time of the Yuan dynasty. Of course, Xia are the paracels. So he built 27 observatories, one in the South Sea, and that was in the paracels. So that was the quarrel with Vietnam. Today, we are quarreling with China on Scarborough Shoal. The Chinese said, oh, wait a minute, we own Scarborough Shoal because it's the place where Gu Sujing built his observatory. That's the Beijing was able to get this. And you can see how far it is. Paracels is 380 nautical miles to Scarborough Shoal. It was impossible. But it was physically impossible for Gu Sujing to build an observatory in Scarborough Shoal. Of the 27 observatories that Gu Sujing built, one is extant today. It remains. In Henan province, it's still there. Very tall, 12.6 meter high. And you have this sundial here. You have to be there every day to take measurements. You have to have a crew to take the measurements. And this is Scarborough Shoal. That's the high tide. That's the highest rock at high tide. Could he have built that? You see, Scarborough Shoal, there are 2 or 3 rocks there above water at high tide. 6 or 10 people can stay there. Could he have built that observatory? That's Scarborough Shoal. If you superimpose the observatories that he built, it was impossible. You know, they pulled down the website, that fake story in the website of Chinese embassy. That's Scarborough Shoal. Satellite image. There the opening. It's huge, about 150 square kilometers. And we always say we own Scarborough Shoal because of the Treaty of Paris. Spain ceded the Philippine archipelago to the U.S. Under the Treaty of Paris, the U.S. paid Spain $20 million. And the Treaty of Paris drew lines, and Spain ceded everything within the lines. Unfortunately, Scarborough Shoal is outside the line. The Spratlys are outside the line. That's why Foreign Minister Wang Yi, in his talk at CSIS in Washington, D.C., he said there are 3 treaties that stipulate Philippine territory: the 1898 Treaty of Paris, the 1900 Treaty of Washington, and the 1930 Treaty with the British. All areas to the west of the lines do not form part of Philippine territory. In other words, this is all areas to the west. This is the West Philippine Sea. All areas to the west of this 118 degrees do not form part of Philippine territory. And of course, Wangyan Island, Scarborough Shoal, the Chinese name for Scarborough Shoal is Wangyan Island. Wangyan Island and Nansha Island, the Spratlys, are outside. So that cannot be Philippine territory. How do we answer this? We go to the second treaty that Wang Yi mentioned. He did not read the treaty. When the Americans came here after signing the Treaty of Paris, they found out there were many islands outside the treaty lines. Batanes, Scarborough Shoal, you have in the Sulu Archipelago, Turtle Island. So they decided to go back to the Spaniards. Can you clarify that all of these other islands are included in the cession of 1898. The Spaniards said no. The Americans said, okay, on top of the 20 million we paid you, we'll pay you another $100,000. The Spaniards said yes. So a treaty was signed, the Treaty of Washington. And in the treaty, Spain clarified that it relinquished to the U.S. all title and claim which Spain may have had to any and all islands belonging to the Philippine archipelago lying outside the lines. Everything else outside of the lines we also cede to you. That is the basis of that, our basis that Scarborough Shoal and the Spratlys belong to the Philippines. So Wang Yi did not read the Treaty of Washington. So the ruling of the tribunal, there was no evidence that China had historically exercised exclusive control over the waters of the South China Sea. There's no evidence at all that they could identify. Therefore, China never had historic rights in the South China Sea. We have this ruling. With this ruling, we will now go to the world. Ask the world, help us convince the Chinese people. What is in it for them, for the rest of the world? Because if China can seize the South China Sea, your big neighbor could seize your exclusive economic zone. You have an interest in maintaining UNCLOS, the law of the sea. If the law of the sea cannot be applied to the South China Sea because of military might, then you are in danger from your bigger neighbor. So it's in the paramount national interest of all states that the law of the sea be maintained in the South China Sea. So before the tribunal ruled on the 9-9, China claimed ownership of the green area. After the ruling, automatically you have high seas. 25% of the South China Sea are high seas. In the high seas, nobody can claim possession or ownership of the high seas. All the fish there belong to mankind. And all around the high seas, you have the exclusive economic zone. The exclusive economic zone is exclusively for the adjacent coastal state. What is the adjacent coastal state in the West Philippine Sea? Only one state, the Philippines. So all the resources here belong exclusively to the adjacent coastal state. This is the Malaysian EEZ in Sabah, Brunei, Malaysia again, Indonesia, and Vietnam, and China. So that is the automatic consequence. When the tribunals struck down the 9-dash line, automatically it affirmed the existence of high seas and EEZs. And in the high seas and EEZs, there is freedom of navigation and overflight. All states can sail here without getting the permission of anyone. All states can fly here, and all states can fly in the EEZs without getting the permission of anyone. So, we won this area. China claimed it. We won it. It's all blue now except for 3 dots. As between the Philippines and the area, legally there are still 3 territories in dispute. Scarborough Shoal and the Territorial Sea, Makinan Reef and Johnson South Reef. And what is the area of this? How big is that? Our EEZ in the West Philippine Sea is 381,000 square kilometers. You deduct the territorial seas of those 3 dots, Scarborough Shoal, Makinan Reef, and Johnson South Reef. You get a net EEZ of 376,000 square kilometers, free from any Chinese claim legally. If China is still there, it's there as a squatter. That maritime space is larger than our total land area. Our total land area, if you put all our islands together, it's just 300,000 square kilometers. So all the fish, oil, gas, and other mineral resources in this huge area belong exclusively to the Philippines. China wants it. That's why I say this is the gravest external threat to the Philippines since World War II. How do we enforce the ruling? Under UNCLOS, there are maritime zones, and from the edge of the territorial sea seaward, there is freedom of navigation and overflight. All merchant ships and military ships, all military aircraft and civilian aircraft can sail and fly without getting the consent of any state. They can conduct military activities in this area without getting the consent of adjacent states. When the ruling came out, the US said, we will sail and fly in the EEZ and high seas of the South China Sea. When they sail and fly, they assert that there are exclusive economic zones, and that if there is an exclusive economic zone, it belongs exclusively to the adjacent coastal state. They are in fact enforcing the ruling for us. France said, we will also sail and fly. We will ask our neighbors to do the same. Why is France concerned? France said, a loss of freedom of navigation on our flight in the South China Sea might lead to similar problems in the Arctic Ocean. France was saying, if China can claim the South China Sea, Russia will claim also the Arctic Ocean, India might claim the Indian Ocean, and that will mean the collapse of the law of the sea, and therefore their navies cannot sail and fly, they cannot protect their trade routes. They are sailing and flying all over the world because they want to protect their trade routes. That is their paramount national interest. So they have a paramount national interest to maintain the freedom of navigation on our flight in the South China Sea. Britain also said, once we finish our 2 aircraft carriers in 2020, we will sail them in the South China Sea. In fact, in 2016, they sent their fighter jets to Japan for joint exercises with the Japanese Air Force. When the British planes flew back, they deliberately announced that the British planes will fly over the South China Sea on their way back to Britain to assert freedom of our flight. Australia said, we will sail and fly. Last year, Australia assembled their biggest naval task force for the last 30 years. And this task force sailed in the South China Sea. And the Australian Navy continues to sail. And their Poseidon, their aircraft, their reconnaissance planes continue to fly over the South China Sea. This is Mischief Reef. Mischief Reef is a submerged area at high tide. So the tribunal said that is totally submerged at high tide. So it's part of the EEZ of the Philippines. It's only the Philippines that can put up a structure there, and whatever structure is built there cannot generate a territorial sea, because only a naturally formed island can generate a territorial sea. So the tribunal said only the Philippines can put up a structure, Mischief Reef, but any structure there is an artificial island. It cannot generate a territorial sea. Now, to prove that Mischief Reef has no territorial sea, this U.S. ship in 2017 sailed within 12 nautical miles. The Chinese claimed a territorial sea out of this artificial island, contrary to UNCLOS. This ship, Zigzag, conducted man-overboard drills, launched drones to show that this is not a territorial sea, because in a territorial sea, you cannot do these things. You can only sail straight expeditiously, an innocent passage. In the territorial sea, a foreign warship can sail under the innocent passage, right of innocent passage, but it must be straight and continuous, expeditious. You cannot loiter, you cannot conduct military exercises, man-overboard drills. But the US said, this is not a territorial sea, we can do all these things, because that is part of the EEZ of the Philippines, and then in the EEZ there's freedom of navigation. So the US is actually enforcing the ruling for us. Are they particularly kind to us? No, they do this all over the world. Whenever a coastal state asserts something that is beyond what customary international law allows, they will do this. They've done this for other states. They will always assert freedom of navigation. That's their national policy for decades now. So, Mischief Reef has no territorial airspace, and this US Poseidon plane flew over Mischief Reef to show to the Chinese, you are not a natural island, you don't have a territorial sea, this is part of the EEZ of a coastal state, we have freedom of overflight here. And the conversation between the Chinese ground controller and the US aircraft went this way. The Chinese said, leave immediately, keep out. The US plane said, we are conducting military activities beyond the national airspace of any coastal state. You cannot drive us away. We have freedom of our flight because this is not your territorial airspace, you are just an artificial island. The tribunal said you do not generate a territorial sea or a territorial airspace. The US is actually enforcing the ruling for us. Not because they love us, but because they have their paramount national interest. The French have 2 frigates. They continuously sail in the South China Sea because the French said, we want to maintain a naval presence in all exclusive economic zones. Because under UNCLOS, they have a right to sail in the exclusive economic zones. They have a right to conduct military exercises, and they are showing that to the Chinese. They've been sailing. The British also, they have 2 warships sailing right now in the South China Sea to assert freedom of navigation. The Japanese, last year the Japanese sent their helicopter carrier, Izumo, to sail in the South China Sea. The helicopters were sent aloft, launched to assert freedom of overflight. And this year, the sister ship Kaga sailed in the West Philippine Sea to assert freedom of navigation and overflight. They don't say, they announce that they are sailing and flying to assert freedom of navigation and overflight in accordance with international law. I told the Americans and Japanese, why don't you add a phrase? And under the tribunal's ruling, there are exclusive economic zones and high seas here. But they're seriously considering it. India has been sending a task force every year to sail in the South China Sea. This year, they sent this task force without much fanfare, without publicity, they sail. And the Chinese take notice of that. And that's recorded. Canada has sent a warship last year and sent again this year. So all these naval powers are asserting freedom of navigation over flight because there are high seas and EEZs. And if there are EEZs, the resources there belong exclusively to the adjacent coastal state, and in the West Philippine Sea, that's the Philippines. So the significance of freedom of navigation and overflight, very important. We don't have the naval might to assert freedom of navigation and overflight, but other countries are doing it because it's in their national interest. We should welcome them at least. But we have been telling them we don't take sides in this freedom of navigation and overflight dispute with China and the US and other naval powers. We should take a position. We should invite all the navies of the world to sail and fly in the South China Sea to assert freedom of navigation and overflight. So I end here. What should the Filipino people do now? Encourage all the navies of the world to sail and fly. And the South China Sea will never become a Chinese lake. Even as I speak, the ruling is being enforced at its core. The core ruling is that the 9 dashed lines have no legal effect, and therefore you have high seas and EEZs. And we should ask the people of the world, the other coastal states, help us convince the Chinese people. And we have all the evidence here. And if we have students here, you should write the editor of Philippine Star. Cite the documents here. China and the Philippines are not close neighbors. We are not separated by a very narrow strip of water. We must not allow this to pass unchallenged. With that, I end my presentation. Thank you and a pleasant day to everyone.